Hey everyone, how we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit, and welcome back to another video. And as part of the Ask SplitSuit a Question series, a bunch of people asked hand history questions, and this one actually came via YouTube. And Lavuta says, is there any merit in check shoving this turn? So let's check out the spot. Okay, so this hand is from Tuna Limit Online. We're playing four-handed. There's a limp from the cutoff, a raise from the button, who is a 32-21 over 30 hands. Hero decides to 3-bet, which I'm very happy about. However, I think the size here is going to be the major problem. So the issue here is that the size is really small. Typically, I'm going to 3-bet 3x at a minimum, which would mean like about 30 cents at a minimum. And against a 32-21, who I'm assuming is not the greatest player in the world, the cutoff decided to open limp from essentially the effective under the gun. So I'm also assuming that they're probably not particularly good. So I'm just going to go to a big size here, totally for value, assuming that they're going to make a lot of mistakes against that size. So I'd really like to see this probably something in like the 40-cent ballpark and feel really, really comfortable and go from there. Somewhere between 3x to 4x is my typical 3-bet size, and I think larger is definitely going to be fine here, especially against weaker opponents with value hands. That's the way that I'm typically going to size. So we end up getting call by the button, go heads up to it, and here decides to lead for 36 cents. Okay, so before we really jump into this, I want to back up one quick tick and look at the SPR here. So we notice there's about 50 cents in the middle, about $1.80 effective, and in that situation we're looking at about 3.5 SPR. Now my default when it comes to SPR is that I'm going to default stack off my overpairs when it's less than 3 SPR, between 3 and 6 is kind of my gray zone, and higher than 6 I don't default stack off. Doesn't mean I won't stack off, just means I don't default have to stack off. So obviously in this situation we're in the gray zone, but we're in the small side of the gray zone. And when I'm typically in the gray zone against someone who I deem as a weaker opponent, I'm typically still going to stack off my overpairs. And in this situation, I see no reason not to do that. I think this is a situation where we can still get it in, feel comfortable. I don't think we're only going to be getting in against things like sets and 2-pair. And if he has a lot of 2-pair, then he can have things like Jack 10 and 10-9 that maybe he overvalues, those kind of things. So ultimately, feeling very, very comfortable here. My general thought process is I'm going to stack off. It's just how am I going to stack off? And it's really important that we understand that and get really, really familiar with playing these kind of SPRs. When we're in 3 and 4-bet pots, we're typically going to be somewhere between like 3 to 5 SPR online. So it's really, really important that you know how to handle these situations, what goes into it, how to view how committed or not committed you are, and then choose a line based upon that. So in this situation, here decides to lead out for 36. And one of the big questions I would ask myself is, could I just check here instead, right? If we checked, what is the button going to do? So I typically assume that there are two kind of button players here. There are the more passive ones who are more likely to check behind if we check to them, but would possibly call a bet with something like 10s or 8s, and in which case that's going to skew me more towards just leaning into them myself, just like Hero did. Or they're the kind of button players who I assume that if I check to them, they're going to bet their entire range. They're going to bet things like Jack X and 10s and 9X, and also things like King Queen and Ace Queen and those kind of things. So depending on which kind of player I think button is going to skew me one way or the other. Now, I think a lot of players are going to fire if you check to them here. I think they're going to bet pretty much the bulk of their range, and they're just going to put you on something like Ace King or Ace Queen and try to take you off it. In which case, cool. Check, induce a bet from them, and then check shove right in their face. Again, it's an SPR where I'm committed, so I'm going to be getting my stack inside one way or another. It's just how am I going to do it? And I think that if we bet, we may lose hands that would have gladly bet into us had we checked, if that makes sense. Things like Ace Queen. I think if we decide to bet here, he's going to fold those a decent chunk of the time, whereas if I check, I think he's going to bet those a decent chunk of the time. And obviously, if he has a set, whatever, sucks to be us. If he has a big draw, cool, good for him. But again, given the SPR, we're going to be getting it in, so it's not a huge deal either way. It's just how do I maximize against the bulk of his range? The worst thing you can do is check here against someone who's likely to check behind, because you really don't ever want this flop to go check, and then you're just giving free equity and hell cards and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you feel comfortable that you can go for a check raise, by all means consider going for that. But in this exact situation, Hero decides to bet, gets called, goes to a pretty ugly turn, and the big question that he has is there any merit to check shoving this turn, which is exactly what Hero ends up doing. So to answer the question of is there any merit to doing this, I guess against someone with a very, very specific read on them, like that they're always going to bet super wide and that you can check raise, get it in, and have an edge, I think typically that's going to be a little bit odd and tough. But again, this all goes back to pre-flop because we chose a smaller size, which created an awkward SPR on the flop. Not super awkward by any stretch, but not as good as we would have wanted or could have otherwise created, I should say. And then the other thing is the flop line. Yes, it's default to bet, but I think a check shove could have made a lot of sense there too. So because we chose both of those things, smaller size pre-flop and just a bet on the flop instead of check raising, we found ourselves in this awkward situation. And obviously the king of clubs is a really gnarly card, not super excited about it. But given the SPR, I'm still going to stack. I don't think check shoving is best though, because again, the worst thing that can happen is this turn goes check check, and you're just giving free equity for days. So I don't really love it because of that risk. I'd honestly just bet the turn myself, and he doesn't have that much more than a pot size bet left anyway, for just back up a couple of ticks. He only has a $1.46 and a $1.20 pot, so I would just lead this out for a buck and get it in if he happens to shove, and if he happened to improve, whatever, sucks to be us. So I don't know what happened for the rest of the hand. There was nothing else included, so this is as far as I got. Again, is there any merit? Maybe. But again, I don't really think we should be getting here like this. I think a better pre-flop size, a better flop line definitely makes this turn decision kind of moot because it doesn't really happen. So Lavuta, thanks for the great hand, and hopefully this helps you the next time you find yourself in a similar situation. And if you or anyone else has a poker-related hand or question, feel free to leave it on our Google Plus page. Leave a link for that in the description box. And also please make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of video. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck out there, and happy grinding.